Leaderonomics show, and today we have with us Shekhar Kapur, acclaimed film director. Welcome to our studio, Shekhar.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you here. You know, you have a very interesting background. You've actually started your career as a management consultant in accounting in an MNC. Tell us a bit about how that happened and how you transitioned out later on to filmmaking.
I was a good
Boy.
I was a good boy. I was a good, middle-class Indian boy. We have to be doctors, accountants, lawyers, or now computer people. So I did that. Remember that at that time, India, if you had to leave India, you only could take $20, and you were not physically allowed to leave India more than once every 2 years. And there was no internet, and there was no STD.
Right.
So you were living in practical isolation. So I would have given my right hand to go out and be at what I thought at that time was the center of the universe, which was London. And so I went off to London. It was a deal. So it wasn't that I was particularly interested in accounting, but I got interested in consulting. That got me interested.
What was it about consulting that interested you?
The ideas of solving problems. You know, what fascinated me is the first thing I learned about consulting is that most people are asking the wrong question.
So ask the right question.
Yeah, so I learned about consulting and that's what instinct is about. Analysis often is about solving a question that somebody has raised. Instinct is often about knowing what the question is, you know. So hunger is instinctual, right? So if you're in a jungle and you're hungry, then there is no question except that you're hungry.
That's right.
And often when we make things more complex, and as we make things more complex, we start to forget what the base question is. And I often say now, when I'm looking at a script, so I learned that in consulting, that what you call it, the people say, well, he took a seat of the pants decision. What is a seat of the pants decision? It's an instinct. An instinct will tell you what the right question is. It will not give you necessarily the answer, but at least lead you to the answer.
That's true.
Right? I'm hungry, and therefore I should go and climb a tree to find it. That's the fundamental problem. Most people don't even know what the fundamental problem is. And in the complex world that we live in, we forget how to look for it.
So you were a management consultant in which firm?
I was a management consultant. I was a manager for a company that took me in called Leaderonomics Company. We were 7 of us, but we had very big clients.
Right.
And I was like the kid. I was only 22 or 23.
Yep.
The others had all come from the very big companies and formed us, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
And how did that transition to acting happen?
Acting happened because I realized that by the time I was 24, I had an unfettered energy that was getting diverted into women, really. At 24, I was saying...
That's almost every 24-year-old, right?
No, this was obsessive.
Okay.
This was really bad.
Okay.
It was terrible. And it was, can you imagine, not every 24-year-old questions it. I just sat there and questioned it. I said, what is happening to you? Why is it? What's wrong? And I realized that there is within us an energy that drives you. And if you do not give vent to you can either dumb it down in complexity, but if you've released it, then you have to explore it. And if you don't explore it and give it a larger perspective than your immediate surroundings, like, okay, there's a pretty girl here, or I can take a fight there, or I can, if you really understand that energy, you realize that energy is about self-exploration. Now, the moment you talk about self-exploration, the word that comes out from self-exploration is self-expression, right? And so at 24, I realized that I have to do something in which I can truly express that which is inside me. So I come back to the fundamental question, what is inside me? What is inside me that is provoking me in this huge energy drive that I'm able to not understand? Back to what I said earlier. So I asked myself that fundamental question. Now, as a 10-year-old, I used to live in Delhi. And Delhi was an unpolluted city at that time. So we used to sleep in the summer on the roof. We call it the kotha, which has different meanings now, but it used to just mean the roof. And so we used to sleep in the roof, and as I looked up, I could see the whole sky. There's no pollution, no light pollution, no pollution. You could see a blanket of stars and a blanket of the universe. And I was just learning physics. And physics was telling me that if it's not measurable, it doesn't exist. That's the first thing you learn in physics, right? The first thing you learn is if you cannot, everything has to have a length and a breadth and depth. If it's not three-dimensional, there is no fourth dimension. Now we can go on and say time is a fourth dimension, everything, but these are all conjectures. That's, as a kid, that's what you taught. And I'd sit there, my father was a doctor, I'd lie there, and I'd say, Dad, how far does this go? He said, forever. So I said, so how many miles is forever? How many miles is forever was, I realized at 24, still my fundamental question. So I realized that if I am to follow how many miles forever, life cannot be about a job or a career. So I said, okay, what are the words that I'm going to drop out of my life? So I realized the first word was going to be career. Because that in itself is not about finding forever. How many miles is forever could only be an artistic bent of mind. So I knew I had to go into the arts. Right? And that was the first step in filmmaking.
It's amazing, right? At 24, you have such profound thoughts and questions.
It came at 10. Most people do. Here's, I come back. Most people do. There's something wrong in our system of education where you're told, well, these are not the right questions to ask. But there are no other questions. What can be another more important question than saying, I'm finite, and the universe I live is infinite. Which one is wrong? Am I wrong? Am I not finite? It's a fundamental question that every religion, every faith, every person has asked. And we are encouraged not to ask that. And there's something fundamentally wrong with our educational system that discourages you from asking fundamental questions. You know?
Does your movies then ask these questions?
All of them. You take a look at Elizabeth. What's a fundamental question? Divinity or mortality? Well, those are fundamental questions. So even if the plot is different, underlying there is all these questions that reverberate in my mind. Now, many years later, but when I was in my 50s, I made friends with Deepak Chopra. We were driving.
Deepak Chopra.
Yeah. You know, the
guru.
Well, he doesn't like the word guru. He says, I'm an interpreter of the Vedas in a scientific way. He's a doctor, that's what he says now. So I'm sitting in the car with Deepak Chopra, and I said, I want to say something to you that sounds quite mad. And he said, well, go away, because this is all about becoming mad. Okay. So I started asking questions. I said, this is how I feel, these are the questions. And he said, oh, so you read that book? I said, I've never read a book. I said, that question. He said, oh, so you read Patanjali? I never read a book. It goes on. It's a 1 hour drive. At the end of it, I say, am I mad? And he said, no, you're probably the most sane person I've ever met. After almost 45 years of asking questions, I went,
thank God.
I'm not mad. I've not lived a life that means that a life of madness. It's been a pursuit. It's not that I haven't done anything. So the idea was, how can you take those fundamental questions and live your life? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that what you'll end up doing in the end is sweeping floors. There's nothing. There's nothing wrong in what you do, provided what you do has a fundamental meditative quality behind it. In the sweeping of the floors, your understanding of the dust. It's a fundamental idea that embodies spirituality and faith and physics and everything in whatever you do, right? As kids, we used to do that. As adults, we don't. As kids, if somebody told me, okay, if you could get involved with cleaning a wall, and it could be the most obsessive thing that you did.
The most exciting thing.
Yeah, it was an exciting, you know.
Exactly.
I gotta clean this wall. Let me see. Why don't we do that anymore? Why do the things that we have to do have to have fame, or wealth, or appreciation? As you grow up, you more and more start to look at yourself not from the fundamental questions that you ask. You start looking at yourself from, you look into other people's eyes and you look and say, what does he think of me?
Yeah.
So you are creating yourself as reflected by other people's eyes. No? Is that you? Of course it isn't. So those were all the reasons I went into film. I went into exploring myself, asking the same fundamental questions.
But how did your films, I mean, was it possibly because you asked these questions that a film became such big things? I mean, that you were to be able to transition from Bollywood up to the Western world was a significant thing in itself also, right?
I think that what lasts is a film that asks you these questions beyond its plot. Then,
so then
you see it 10 years later. People
It's
see a
timeless.
film 20 years. It becomes timeless.
Yeah.
Why? Because actually, now this is a little more technical about storytelling. Storytelling is fascinating. Most of our storytelling comes from mythology. Why do these myths last? Why does China go on and they keep telling the story of the Monkey King? Or in India, they keep telling the story of Ramayana or Hanuman. And I'm sure in the Malay culture, there must be stories that they've been told, they were killed again and again. Why do we keep telling these stories? Because these stories are much more, they're about so much more than the plot. So the story exists in what it's not told. For example, some of the greatest music, some of the greatest classical music that has survived, Mozart, or the great opera singers anywhere in the world, or Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, who was this great Sufi singer from Pakistan. He's exciting you with a note that actually his vocal cords are not able to reach. So he's taken to a point, drops you, and your imagination
takes you
that. That's what great poetry is about. It takes you, and the words that a poet has not used are the words that you imagine.
So it's the same with film.
It's the same with storytelling, and therefore the same with film. With film, I often say that actually what lasts, the film lies in between the cuts. So you have 100 scenes put together. Between the cuts, there are a million scenes that you've not shown, but the way you cut the story together provokes. And what's the most fascinating thing is, you see the film at 20 years, when you're 20 years old, it means different, something different to you. You see it when you're 30 years old, it means because your life experience has changed. So all of that changes. And I think that your question, why was I able to make these jumps? Or why are my films watched again and again? The answer is because the actual story exists in not the story I've told, but beyond that.
Okay. So if you start looking back at your life, were there specific moments that defined your leadership? I mean, in terms of, at least in terms of filmmaking.
I think leadership is a key word that's misunderstood.
Okay. So what's your definition then?
I don't think the greatest leaders are the leaders that lead. The greatest leaders are the leaders that provoke. So I would say the platform and provoke and allow people to move forward. That's a leader.
So when you speak about a leader being a provoker, I assume you've played that role as a provoker in your films.
Yeah. Do you feel like Bandit Queen? I didn't end the film by saying that I didn't end it by her saying, okay, she killed somebody, she was fine, she found a man that she loved and she could miss. The greatest films that will come out. And that's one of the reasons that YouTube and the internet is becoming such a powerful tool, and because people are being encouraged to go back to who they are. And you can. And if you go back, if you notice, the most blogs or Twitters and personal, people's courage to express themselves is coming back. And if you can make a 10-minute film, a 20-minute film, doesn't matter that you make a big Star Wars ultimately, Star Wars ran not because of its technology, but one fundamental question: is the Force with you? How spiritual is that? Is the Force with you? The idea of the Force held this incredible franchise together for generations. Simple thing: is the Force with you?
Fantastic. One final question. What pieces of advice or nuggets of wisdom would you give our viewers if you were able to give 1, 2 pieces of advice?
I've just given it.
Okay.
I've just given it. There's
For a filmmaker?
the fun. For a filmmaker?
Well, for
or
generally,
for anything.
For anybody.
Explore yourself.
Explore yourself.
Don't judge yourself from other people's eyes. 2, persistence.
Okay.
Persistence.
Persistence.
Yeah. Persistence is really important, and nothing ever will compensate for hard work. Not because there's no instinct, but your instinct, you don't recognize your instinct without hard work. You could have instinctually be the greatest singer with the greatest voice in the world, but what use is that till you sit down and do riyaz 4 hours a day to capture the talent that you have? The talent that you have is doesn't belong to you. You access it. You access it from somewhere beyond yourself. But when you access it, how do you hone it? You hone it. A.R. Rahman, great friend of mine, sits 14 hours a day with his music. Every day. He'd do it on an airplane. The moment he lands in a car, he's doing it. Why is he doing it? He knows that the only way that he can access the compositions, they are not his. They come from somewhere else. How does he catch them? How does he compose them? How does he turn them into music? Through a creation of what we call discipline. Catchment area. You have to do that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've had Shekhar
Thanks.
Kapur,
Thank
acclaimed filmmaker and director here on the Leaderonomics show. Thanks for being
Thank you.
with us.
Thanks.